Usually, a modern slackliner is more like a hippie of 21st century, but slacklining, like other sports, is not immune to dumb people, useful idiots, and Russians. This is Kamil Mamayev. He calls himself a tightrope walker in the sixth generation from the village of Tsovka 1, Lekets by origin. At first glance, Kamil is a typical representative of the prideful Dagestan people, advocating for the revival of the language, culture, and traditions of his region.
Uniqueness of each nation in a rapidly developing world can only be preserved through traditions. We have drawn attention to the problem of saving the villages of Dagestan, where the people no longer live. If a generation that cannot trick the tightrope grows up, then we bitterly admit that the ancient art is forgotten and lost.
Kamil also made a comment on the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine.
Look how beautiful the world is. I stand for peaceful conflict solutions.
Me, we might become friends. No. Kamil is in fact a standard visualization of the madness of a person living in Russia. As early as June 26, he made a post where he walks the High Lane above the large poster Akushinsky district with us. Well, maybe this is just how it should and he haven't seen that poster, and he liked the letter Z in the comments by accident. It might be, right? And finally, in December, 9 months after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Kamil have finally shown his position.
The kiss that woke Russia up was the roar of rockets, city fires, women cry. Russia woke up and moved the lid of the coffin. Her rise from the grave is called a special military operation.
В огне обстрелов я шаг, ломая встречный ветер. По Украине красный флаг идет, как в 43-м.
Организовано специально для военнослужащих, и видно, что вы подошли с такой душой. То, что сегодня ребята на протезах танцевали, это самый счастливый день в их жизни.
Does this surprise me? No. Fucked up mind of Kamil Mamayev is a typical behavior of any Russian. Historically, Dagestan is quite a militant region and not very economically developed. It consists of many villages inhabited by small ethnic groups such as Leks, as Kamil Mamayev himself, and most Dagestan people go to serve in the Russian army. Kamil Mamayev is no exception. He served in the Northern Bodyguard Squad from 2001 to 2004. It is worth to mention that these were the years of the Second Chechen War, so it is quite possible that he could have participated in the war against his neighbors of the same Caucasian people as himself. Kamil, like most Russians, loves and is nostalgic for his time in the army. Because what could be better than the feeling of the permissiveness while walking with a machine gun and being able to dominate ethnic Russians, at least in the army? Kamil sees no issues in the fact that he is trying to revive Dagestan traditions and culture, and at the same time shouts about Great Russia, which at the same time destroyed Dagestan language and culture. An interesting fact is that Kamil Mamayev walked the High Line at the place of the last battle of Caucasian War, where the Russians finally enslaved Dagestan. I wonder what he meant by that he likes how he's currently living in Russia? Already during the war, the Franco-German European culture channel Arte released a film about Kamil Mamayev, a sixth-generation tightrope walker from Dagestan. How can you even imagine when a person who supports the war is shown on the state TV channel? Kamil Mamayev actively shared this film about himself in his social networks, showing off how good he is that he is being shown on a Franco-German TV channel. We couldn't ignore it. We wrote a letter where we shared everything we know about Kamil Mamayev and how he supports Russia's invasion into Ukraine. To be honest, we didn't expect an easy victory here, or any reaction at all after first letter, but 2 weeks later, we got a reply from the Arte TV channel. They said that during the filming, Kamil didn't speak out for the war. And it turns out that after looking at his posts and Instagram page, like they said, that maybe he had changed his opinion, and that is why they immediately removed the film from all their media resources, from all their sites, and from the official site, and forced Camille to remove all mentions of their TV channel from his social networks, which he did. Ha 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 ha. I was so happy. The case of Kamil Mamayev is not the only one among slackliners in Russia. Meet Gennady Skripko. Gennady is a fairly well-known slackliner in Russia and is especially popular among Europeans. Why? Because he's over 45 years old. Probably the Europeans hope that they also would be able to walk high lines after the age of 45. Gennady is not so active in his social media. Usually, he makes posts with mountain pictures, without any text or own thoughts. But Gennady has a story that even Russian slackliners tried to keep quiet. In 2019, there were protests against the exclusion of candidates for the elections to the Moscow city representatives. And in parallel with this, the Moscow authorities held a free festival of pop artists with a highline rigged above. In fact, this festival was kind of a pro-Putin anti-Maidan. There isn't much information about this festival on the internet, because everyone tries to keep quiet that they participated there at all. There are several photos of the highline above Sakharov Street. On these photos, you see a highliner walking over the festival, but you can't see his face. Our team was able to find out who exactly was in these photos. Because as you can see, the same harness, the same pants, and the same positioning of a hangover behind his back. Gennady was not the only highliner who participated in the festival, but we currently have no evidences about the other people. Why should we even care what Russian slackliners are doing? Not long before full-scale invasion, Russia began to use slacklining for its propaganda. They supported highlines in Moscow, Perm, Dagestan, and other places. Not understanding this, world slackliners began to participate in these events. And they still support Russians, because they follow them on social media, consider them their friends, like their posts, and this gives some weight to their position and statements. For example, Friedi Kühne, a very famous German slackliner. He took part in events with Russians more than anyone else. He traveled with a group of Russians through Europe and Asia, including Iran. He helped rigging projects in Moscow, Perm, and Dagestan, and still maintains contact with Russian highliners. He also likes posts of the mentioned before Kamil Mamayev, where he talks about Great Russia and walks with a red flag in support of war. Personally, I do not blame Friedi. I think he just doesn't understand the context and still thinks Russians can be good. And I think that he even suspected something when he did these events, because few years ago he made a separate post about the fact that he doesn't support the Russian government, but just hands out in Perm. But I would like to mention once again to the international slackline community that you should be very careful with Russians. How you behave with Russians and which Russians do you communicate with.